Welcome to Salish Sasquatch, where we share evidence as well as encounters. I've been wanting to put together this video for a while now. This video is a compilation of our very favorite guests, our favorite encounters, channel favorites, and all of that wrapped into one video. So these are in no particular order, but we will start with Dean Parker of the Makah tribe in Neah Bay, Washington. Enjoy.
All right, my name is Dean Parker. I'm from Neah Bay, and a lot of people call me Papado. And I'm going to tell you about my encounter with the Sasquatches. My first one was driving back to Skokomish, and we was going through tulips there, and it was during the nighttime, and I come up on the road, and I told Lametta, I says, "See that?" "Yes." "You know what that is?" "Yes, it's a Sasquatch," and it took about 3 steps across the road and is gone. So that was my first encounter. My second one was had me pretty scared, but I held my wits. I was what happened is I was hitchhiking back home from Skokomish. I was going through the canal again, and I was on the road. I was getting little short rides here and there through the canal, and here comes the nighttime, and it got dark, and no traffic on the road, and I was just walking down the middle road trying to see the white line, make sure I was still on the road. And, oh, this is no fun. Then I heard this whistling noise out there in the distance. This is not going to be good. And I kept on hearing whistle, getting a little bit closer, whistling at me, and I knew they were really getting. I was walking with the wind in my face, so I couldn't. When they came up, they started making it come up on me, and they started making this kissing noise at me. And they're just like they were just making that kissing noise. And I thought, oh, just hold together, keep yourself in thought, and I almost hit the panic button and just collapsed, but I just kept on walking, and pretty soon they were right up on me. Probably a little bit closer this way on both sides of me. But they never did nothing. They just walked with me, and it was probably about 3 or 4 minutes, and I could hear a car coming. Oh, this is going to be good to have that car coming in. I stood right in the middle of the road, didn't move, so he wouldn't go by me. I said, "You all right?" Yeah, I'm all right. I didn't want to tell him what was happening, but I said, I need a ride. He says, I'll give you a ride. Oh, that was my experience with these two Sasquatches.
Well, I grew up in Missouri, and I didn't have TV. We didn't have TV when I was a kid, so I didn't know anything about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And my family moved to Washington State, and one of the first trips I did as a kid was I went on a backpacking trip with, I think there were 12 of us kids and one adult, and we were hiking on Mount Three Fingers in the Boulder River Wilderness, and something in the woods pounded on a tree right next to us, and it was inhumanly loud sound. No person could have done it, and I think it knocked the number of people in our group on the tree. It was boom, 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 real fast, real loud. And I grew up, playing in the woods, and I never heard anything like that. And everybody there, we just froze, and the hair on your arms and the back of your neck stood up. And the adult guy the leader was up in the front, and he said, okay kids, let's keep moving. That was a woodpecker. And the kid in front of me turned to me and he said, maybe it was Bigfoot. And I said, what's that? Because I had never even heard of it. And he said, you don't know what Bigfoot is? I said, no. So anyway, that was the first I'd ever heard of it. And some years later, we'll see, it would be about 20 years later, I realized I hadn't been on any camping trips for a long time, and I just worked and paid my mortgage, so I decided I'm going to start camping again. So I went camping with some friends in the Cascades, and the first night I got to this one camping trip, I pulled in, I was talking to a few people, and some other friends of ours pulled in, a couple, and they said, oh, we're going to drive further up this road, and there's a spot up there they wanted to camp, and we'll set up our tent and then we'll walk down here. So it was starting to get dark, and a few other people had shown up. We were all just kind of standing there talking, and I saw they had their headlamps on, and so I saw these two people walking down to where we were. We were in this quarry, and the entrance to the quarry was over to my left, and the road kind of skirted around the edge of it. And so they were coming, the two people that had camped further up the road, they came walking down the hill. They had their headlights on, and they were about over here on my left when I saw a tall figure following them on the road. It was very slender, but very tall. And I remember saying, hey, I see something up there. And my buddy who was over there, he said, oh yeah, that's the, so-and-so, that's those people that are friends. And I was like, no, they're over here. And everyone just kind of ignored me. But I watched this figure walk into view, and it was on the road, and it turned its head and it looked right at me. And I measured it. It was 80 feet away, but it turned its head and it looked right in my face, because I was the only person looking at it, like 5 times. And its head was kind of like down like this. It looked like it was like hunched over in front of its shoulders, and real fast it could look right at me. But I remember the shape of the top of the back of its head was like this. It was conical, and its head was really not that big in comparison to its body. It didn't have a massive head or anything, but it had that sagittal crest shape. And so it walked across the road, and there was a small hill that you'll hear later came into play a couple nights later, but it went up the little hill, and there was an evergreen tree, and it stopped behind the tree and leaned out like this and looked at me and ducked back. And after a couple seconds, it walked it straight into view again from the side. The whole time I saw it was from the side. It took a couple steps and then turned its back, and it went out of sight down behind the little hill. So that was the very first night of that camp trip. A couple nights later was when we heard the thing. You tell what we heard.
All right, so there's probably about 5 of us around the fire, and you know, we were just talking, you know, what campers do, sitting around the fire, poking the fire and stuff. And one of the people in our group was camped just under that road that went above the camp, where he had seen the sighting earlier, and that's where his campsite was, not far from the fire, probably like 20 feet, 25 feet.
Like right behind us.
Behind us, yeah.
Yep.
And anyway, it got really late. And he's like, all right, everybody, I think I'm going to go turn in for the night. And he started turning to walk toward his camp, and all of us around the fire kind of just said, good night. You know, everybody like...
That was like, good night, and then you said good night.
And yeah, someone else said good night. And then right after that, from up on the hill where he had that sighting, we hear in like a deep, like raspy voice, we just hear, good night. And it was like almost like someone that doesn't speak English trying to say an English word, like mimicking us. And we just all looked at each other, and the guy walked into his camp, turned back around and came back to the fire. I think I'll hang out at the fire a little bit longer. And
yeah, we all heard it.
Yeah, there's like 5 people that heard it. So and everybody that was accounted for that was hanging out with us was, you know, there. So
it was a pretty loud, hollow sounding voice.
Like if someone had something in there. Yeah, like someone had something in their mouth they couldn't pronounce the word very well.
Yeah. Yeah, you didn't hear like the D.
Yeah.
Or the, you know, it wasn't pronounced very well.
Deep raspy sound.
Yeah. Yeah, it was I think not including the guy going to his tent, but there were 4 of us still at the campfire, and the guy on my right said goodnight, I did, you did, and then that lady that was there said goodnight, and it was after she said goodnight that the voice said goodnight. But you know what? It's interesting. We said the guy's name. We all said goodnight, so-and-so.
Yeah.
But the thing on the hill, it just said goodnight.
Yeah,
it didn't try to say his name.
Yeah, so that started everything. And then I found this area like probably, I don't even know, months later. I would just spend hours and hours driving up here. I would sit in my truck and just listen. Turn my truck off and just listen for hours. I don't know, I could do it right now and sit here for like 6 hours and just not do nothing. But yeah, we were driving, and the person in my back seat noticed the Bigfoot first walking and just started slapping me on the back of the head really, really hard. Stop, stop, stop. And we jump out of the truck, and there was I was at least 9 feet tall. It was super tall. And it was walking along the tree line there. And it was just walking, just like it was just on a mission. Just walking, and there was 2 deer sitting there, and the deer were just grazing, and it walked right up to the deer. Or no, I'm sorry, that's not right. So when we stopped my truck, it noticed us stopping, right? And the deer were just sitting there grazing, and it stopped and was kind of watching to see what we were doing. I jumped out of my truck and went around the back of my truck, and it dropped down to all 4s. Like, I mean, it was just like this. And it stood there on all 4s for maybe, it's hard to tell in those moments, because you're just like, I don't know what's like, it could have been 20 seconds, it could have been like a half a second. Then it stood back up. My thought was trying to make us think it was a bear, and it realized we weren't moving, so it stood back up. It walked right by the 2 deer the deer were like sitting there, their backs were you know how when a cat gets scared, their hair stands up on their back? I've never seen a deer do this, and both of the deer had they were just sitting there frozen in fear with their hair standing straight up on their backs. Well, I've never seen that before. And it just walked right between the 2 deer, hit the tree line, and then I think it just dropped to the ground and was gone. But it was kind of foggy that morning, but it looked like it just vanished, and then that was the last I saw it. How far do you think that was to that tree line from that?
From the cabin?
Yeah, where that little old broken down cabin
with
is.
With the tarp on top of it around the corner?
Like 100 yards maybe?
Yeah, or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been back there. So you actually walked back there.
I tried.
And they caught you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But my second big story was right here. This is why I stopped right here. I saw a deer. I saw a little guy eat a deer. The deer had his front hooves were in the air. His back hooves were kind of like little mangled, like, but sideways. The deer's head was right there. It was laid, so his feet were down, his butt was down here, and the little, whatever it was, the Bigfoot was laying on top of it, like eating his belly. I don't know. And so I hit we just had the 9-footer happen.
In the same day?
Same, like 20 minutes later this happened. Right, I know, and I've never seen one till like.
You never saw one until that day, and then you see two.
Yep, we had the footprint happen maybe 2 weeks before this. So this just spawned, this just got me up here, and I just started looking. And that's why I think they were down here for the fishes, and then they just bailed. Like, I think they're down here a bunch for a certain time of year, and then they take off.
What did it do when you pulled up? You weren't sure what it was at first.
No, it looked like there was like some you could tell there were two different colors. So the deer was like a lighter brown, and then whatever was attached to it was like a darker brown. And so I could tell there was two things attached there. And so I pull up, I see it, and I'm just already gung-ho because I just seen the one in the field there. And so I'm just ready. I put my truck in the park, and I jump out before my truck even stopped moving. And I'm like running around the back of it like this, as fast as I've ever moved in my life. I come around this corner, and all I see is the hooves of the deer going over the side of the bank. That's all I saw. I just saw the hooves getting pulled over, like it had it and just tucked it and ran. And I was too scared to look over the edge.
How big do you think the small one was?
Small. Well, it was smaller than a deer. I don't know, 3-4 feet maybe.
Didn't someone find the deer later or something?
Yeah. So I was working at the casino that we met at, right? And I was a bartender there at the time, and somebody came up there. There's people up here that were doing research up here for it, and they said they really want to talk to me and they want me to show them. So I was all right. They kind of were like I felt like they didn't believe me at all. I was really kind of like, I wasn't feeling it at all. And they walked down, and the guy goes, "Oh my God!" They come down, they pull all the bones up. The rib bones were broken in half. A deer rib bone is like bigger than our rib bones. They're big. So whatever it was, took down there and just chop, chop, chop. And amazing. But yeah, they found the whole deer pile.
I had myself here. So we heard what sounded like popping or snapping branches. We shrugged it off until it happened again. It was closer and startled me into shouting involuntarily. We drew pepper spray, packed up, and fled hastily and loudly. Nope, nope, nope. So then the next page here, I have, what the heck was that? So I went through and I was like, pros and cons of, if it was a bear, here's what I would have expected. Because this is part of nature journaling practice, is to go through and find a provisional hypothesis for what it is you're experiencing. And so I'm like, okay, well, if it was a bear, I would expect these things to occur. Bears are big enough to break branches. Bears would slap the ground with their forepaws, but I would have expected to hear huffing or jaw popping. Yeah. Black bears almost never try to intimidate people, and if they do, they make really obvious bluff charges. You probably would see a bear. I didn't think it was a deer, but I said, okay, well, if it was a deer, here's what I'd expect. Was it a wild cat? Was it a creepy person? And then my final one that I didn't want to even put down was it a squatch, And I was like, well, pros, we're in Packwood. It's very likely behavior for everything I've, read about, but also it's a cryptid, and that's crazy. And so that's kind of what's got me started down the rabbit hole of this stuff.
Oh, it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so that is what got me started. Was just a really creepy encounter while picking huckleberries. So I'm going to share the story of my possible Sasquatch encounter at a lake in or near Packwood, in the Packwood surrounds, not far from Packwood Lake, I'll say that. Not at Packwood Lake, but near Packwood Lake. It was 2022, right before the Goat Rocks fire broke out. And a coworker and I decided to go huckleberry picking because I had found this lake, and I had been going fishing there, going after the cutthroat trout, but I noticed there were tons of huckleberry bushes all around, and so I said, well, let's go up there in the August and we'll go pick a bunch of huckleberries. So we go up, I pick her up at the gas station, we get in my little beater Subaru and we take the rutted road up there. I'll mention, because everyone loves this, that it's a road that you will give your vehicle Packwood pinstripes, which means that you're going to get all scratched up because this road is pretty much abandoned and the only people who really use it are dirt bikers. So we go up the 3 or 4 miles up to this little lake and we hop out and we have our picking gear and we find a nice patch of berries and we're picking and we're chit-chatting. But after about 2 hours, you know, the chit-chatter kind of mellows out and there's, you know, not a lot of conversation. We're just kind of quiet and we're in what people who study bird language would describe as baseline. So, you know, the birds are making some noise, but there's not a lot of activity. If they were disturbed by us, they've settled down. We're just kind of two animals in the bush, picking berries, doing our thing. And we are very like calm and sort of complacent. If I was being alert, I'm not now. I feel super calm and confident about where I'm at. But then we hear a few sounds that get our attention. The first one, and if you are from the Pacific Northwest, you'll be familiar with this, when you get the really deep layers of duff, the old dead layers of tree needles, it can kind of be sort of hollow and resonant if you step on it, if you stomp on it, or if you were to hit it with a stick. And we heard this like thunk, thunk, thunk sound, as if something was like hitting the ground with your heel really hard. And that kind of got our attention. We were like, that was a little weird. We look at each other like, that's odd. But we go back to picking, and then we hear some branches breaking, and then we hear that thunk, thunk, thunk sound again. And on top of that, we hear a Douglas's squirrel start screaming. They have that like call like that, which made me think, okay, well, that's something that has concerned this animal enough that it's concerning to me. And I get a little like nervous just describing it. So we hear that, and that frightens me enough that I kind of involuntarily shout out, "Hey!" like that, because I've mentioned before, like I grew up in Seattle, and my mother taught me, like, if there is something threatening, you want to be on the offensive. You want to be scarier than whatever that scary thing is. So that's what I did. But I had this feeling of like doom, like terror, like my knees felt weak. I felt really frightened, and my concern was for my coworker. I just wanted to get her to safety. So she gets out her bear spray, and I'm like shoving her ahead of me, like, you get to the car, I will carry on the back, even though I was really scared because that meant I was closest to whatever it was that was being scary. But we get to the Subaru, we get in there, I crank on the engine, and I take off. And I've never driven so dangerously down a rutted road. And that really bothered me. And that's kind of where I went through that series of elimination to try to figure out what on earth that could have been. But it bothered me enough that I went back a few weeks later. I'd have to go over my notes to find out exactly when. Because A, I wanted to catch some cutthroat trout, and it was a really good spot for that. And B, I was like, well, this was frightening, but I don't want to be like controlled by this fear. That's silly. Like I'm someone who's gone backpacking by myself in Glacier National Park. You know, I made my parents sick all of my youth, like having to go out into the woods by myself, and I've encountered grizzlies and black bears and scary, sketchy people. And so I figured, like, okay, let's just get my head around this. It's gonna be okay. So I went back to the exact spot that we were huckleberry picking. And in this spot, there's like a big dead tree that's sort of like jutting out into the pond. And so I figured, okay, well, if anything freaky happens, at worst comes to worst, I can get onto this log, I can jump into the lake, and I can swim back over to my car because there's a straight shot. And I'm, you know, throwing my little spinners, and I'm freaked out. I just have like a gross feeling, and I'm like looking over my shoulder, and I'm like, come on, it's fine, it's whatever, you're just fishing, it's a normal day. And then I hear that thump, thump, thump sound again, and I'm like, oh God, no. And so I'm so frightened that I get up onto this tree trunk that's sticking out into the pond, and I like get out on it as far as I think I can, and I'm pretty sure that I made some noise. I was like, hey, you know, like, I'm gonna intimidate you. If you're a deer, this should frighten you. If you're a cat, if you're a bear, this should be enough to freak you out. And it was about that moment that a tree branch came flying in my direction, didn't hit me, landed short of me by, 20 feet or so. But the way that I can describe the force with which it was thrown was that one time I went with a friend to the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle, and we were hanging out by the Asian elephant exhibit, and the elephant must not have wanted us there because she picked up a branch and hurled it at us, and it broke into a few pieces and like rained down on us, and it was terrifying because elephants are very strong and they can throw like a big 10-foot stick, and that is close to the force of what was thrown at me. And so at this point, you know, my heart's racing, my breath is shallow, my knees feel like they're gonna give out, I feel like I'm gonna throw up, and I'm so frightened because I realize like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I'm here, I'm by myself, this is so stupid, and the car is right over there, but like I will still have to go into the tree line, get back on this sketchy little trail that's barely a trail to get back over there. And so I'm petrified, I don't know what to do, and oh man. And this was around the time right before that Goat Rocks fire started, and it was starting to get smoky, and I was like, this is just weird, I need to get out of here. So, you know, I finally like get up the courage, I'm like having to psych myself up, and I get back on that little trail, and I get to the car, and I'm going around in circles the whole time, like trying to make sure I have like every base covered, get back into the car and speed off, and I've never been back there since. I've thought about it. Part of what has kept me from going back is that road is so sketchy, and I don't have that old beater car anymore, and I don't want to scratch up a different vehicle. It's not a long walk from the main road, and there have been times that I've tried to walk, you know, a quarter of a mile up there just to see how I feel, and I am so overwhelmed with fear that I can't go back up there by myself, which is like kind of shameful for me because I think of myself as like, I'm not afraid of anything. I run into a strange man in the woods and I'm like, yo, what's up? You know, but this was a totally different level of being petrified.
Near the Skookumchuck Reservoir, all of that area around there is off limits to people. And the witness on this report that happened near there used to sneak in, and he would find caves and other artifacts that led him to believe that the Sasquatches were hanging around there. But even more, he used to hunt the Vale Tree Farm, which is Weyerhaeuser land over here, and you got to have a permit. You got to pay for a permit to get on there. And he was hunting one day, and the transmission went out on his truck. And so he coasted down a hill to a log landing and pulled off there. He had to spend the night. And then the next morning, a Weyerhaeuser guy came along and gave him a ride back to town to get a tow truck. When they got back, his truck had been pushed off the log landing, and big boulders had been piled on top of his truck. Well, he never got his truck back. But here's the interesting thing. Even before I got into Bigfooting, way over here by Alder Lake, some kids were camping, and they left their car up on the road and had to hike down through the woods to camp along the lake here. They heard something going on with their car, and so they started running up. As running up the trail, the car came down the side of the hill, crashing. The car was in gear and had its brake set, and something pushed that car off the cliff. So we have something like that happen in the Vale Tree Farm. Same deal happened over here by Alder Lake. Are they connected? Possibly.
September 1st, 2022, I was archery hunting in Oregon at the coast, and it was a pretty crazy experience. So I was hunting, and I had binoculars on my chest, and I'm walking, and I hear snapping and popping in the bushes, and I look down, and there's elk poop right at my feet, like this coming off this steep. It's steep. I go up all the steep hills, and so I kept hearing this popping and snapping, and so I grabbed my binoculars thinking that, okay, there's an elk coming through or whatever, because I'm chirping with the cow call, and I'm looking through the binoculars, and I see what looks like the top of a head, like moving like it was doing something, and I was like, what the heck is that? And I kept staring longer and longer, and then it stopped, and it turned its head, and I seen the top of its head, and I was like, okay, I knew it wasn't a bear or anything, and I started like kind of shaking like this. Luckily there's a tree right next to me about like that big around, a little sapling tree, and I was able to like lean against it to like stop my shake. And this is at 8 in the morning, so I get up this hill, And I never left this spot until dark. I stayed there all day watching it, and I was staring through these openings with my binoculars, catching the movement. I tried to get my phone up in the binocular. It's just so, I mean, you're only seeing through the holes, you know. September 1st, it's really thick and green. And so I'm staring and staring, and I've caught some pretty good glimpses of him. It was a side of his head. I'm saying it's a he because it looked pretty manly, and the jaw just looked like 2-3 inches thick. That's what really stood out the most, was this jaw. And it had like a black skin to it, and like its lips were like gray, like elephant color. And they were working in there, and there was a big oak tree that had fell, and there's a couple pine trees that fell too, and it had like this brush over the top of it, like sticker bushes. So it looked, when they were working, you could see the bushes just moving all over the place. And there had to have been a few of them in there. And I've hunted in Washington, Oregon my whole life, and I've never smelt them, never seen footprints or anything like that. But I started smelling them, and I knew whatever they were behind me because the wind was blowing this way down in there, and it smelled like a really pungent skunk mixed with like body odor, like if you haven't showered for like a month, like really, really strong. It was like two smells, like really pungent, and then like the armpit. So it wasn't like one smell, it was like two really strong smells with it. And yeah, these guys were working in there. I don't know what exactly they were doing, but I think one was digging, and then the others were doing something. It was funny because when I first seen him, he kind of like sat up and was like he was almost like throwing a fit from working or something. Like he didn't, like he was kind of, you know, because they were digging in there. There's a lot of work going on out there.
But you saw him exhale?
Yeah, he was like kind of like doing, you got to do the dishes and you don't want to do it. He's like leaned up against the tree. One was big. The one I seen was probably more mid-size, or probably not a full-grown adult.
How many were there?
I'm guessing at least 3 or 4. At least, well, and whatever was I know there was something behind me too, because I could smell them, and the wind was blowing to my back, and I'd get whiffs of them here and there.
Do you think it was watching you?
Oh, it had to have been.
Just keeping an eye on what you were doing?
Probably. Because I had a 10mm pistol on my chest and a chest rig, and then I have my binoculars on that go over it. But I mean, yeah, I would never shoot one. I'm almost trying to prepare myself, because that would be really cool if, you know, I could get really close like that, and it would be awesome to not be scared. But I think I am. I think I'm past that. I've pictured a lot of things. I've pictured, you know, me like, that'd be just so cool. I pictured myself like if I was to see one, it'd be big. I was like, man, I'd feel his arms. I'm kind of a goofball, so I'd be like, man, it'd be kind of cool to go up to one and just like let him feel the big old biceps and stuff. And when I was watching them throughout the day, or watching because I was staring in one spot and my eyes were hurting from staring at these things, and something popped in my head about me shooting one. Like it was showing me like shooting one, not any words, just like a visual. And like I was like, whoa! I stopped it right away. I was like, the heck, you know, like why are you putting that in my head? And I just like, I don't know why I thought this, maybe because like I'm a peaceful dude or whatever, but I just pictured my hand like going up against theirs or something, like we're kind of like the same, you know. And I'm like, no, we don't, like basically, whoa, no. And that was weird to me too. I was like, okay, that was really strange that they would, and I know that was definitely them too.
We hear the Sasquatch quite often. I've actually recorded them year round. The sightings is a different story. So we hadn't had a sighting in over 10 years until Friday, May 10th, which was actually the day of the Aurora Borealis. I saw a Sasquatch that was standing across a field that was about 200 yards away from us. And what I saw was very two-toned in color. It was similar to like an orangutan red. An orangutan red all over here. I saw the entire shoulder, and I saw the entire head. I'll show you the drawing that I did in a minute, but there was a orangutan color, but it was more golden, more bronze. And then there was a second color. There was a lighter color, a lighter golden bronze. It might have had gray to it. And this was on the patch of his arm right here, his or her arm. I assume it's a male because of the conical head I saw. Was very conical, and the females don't appear to have very pronounced coned heads. So I saw this light patch here, and then I saw there was something on the face, something up here that was also a discoloration, this second color, this light color. I saw it briefly. Jonathan was standing over here facing me, and he was talking, and I was thinking about what he was saying, and I briefly looked up, down, and then caught what I saw and looked across the field, and just like a typical Sasquatch sighting, it was gone.
Hi, I'm Mike Leone. I'm from Portland, Oregon. And on September 28th, 2012, I saw a Sasquatch right here. And basically I pulled into this spot late at night. It was a little bit after 11. Really nothing happened. I actually fell asleep right over there in the chair. Woke up sometime in the middle of the night, crawled in. I had a Honda Element at the time. I had the little camper in the back. And just went to sleep like I always do. I woke up. I had the windows cracked. It was a beautiful morning. I was just listening to the birds, laying on my back, when I heard a stellar jay squawking. And that made me sit up. As soon as I sat up, I caught movement to my left. And right there on that road, there was a Sasquatch walking away. I only saw it from the back for a few seconds. Walked away around that bend and right out of view. And the first thing I said was, "That's my sighting." I came walking back down. I wanted to get my regular shoes on, and off in the woods up there, I heard this samurai yell, like just wah, rah, rah, really loud. And as I was walking back, I'm like, it almost sounded like it was getting reprimanded by the other one, because maybe it got seen or something. I don't know, but yeah, I searched all around that whole day. There was nobody camped here. Both of those campsites were closed. It was the end of September. It was right about here. I saw it. And I would say it is about 6.5 to 7 feet, dark brown, very broad-shouldered, thick. And it definitely appears like they have no neck, just the way their shoulders and trapezes are built. And they definitely walk with about a 5-degree lean forward. And this thing just walked away slowly. Very similar to the last few seconds of the Patterson film, the way it walked, a brisk walk around this bend, and it was out of view. And that's all I saw.
I came here from just about Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Kind of want to, if you're into Bigfoots or even the backcountry, you definitely want to see Washington. So I did this backpacking trip. It was in August. I think it was around August 19th or so. Lewis County, Washington. That's a pretty much a well-known area. So we did a backpacking trip there. And I remember a few days into this backpacking trip, me and Ronnie, who also is from the East Coast, we pitched our tents up on this, it's kind of like a ridge that overlooked a meadow. And I figured that if we were going to hear anything, that this was going to be the prime location. And because we were so excited to be in Washington, we had this great shot of Mount St. Helens, and it was a full moon. I remember the moon was really full, so we got to see the moon rise, which was cool. It was about 1:30 a.m. and I remember Ronnie was getting tired. He said that he was gonna hit the sack, and so he's in his tent, and no more than 2 minutes I already hear him snoring. So he was so exhausted. Maybe another moment goes by, and I hear this scream howl. I can't even produce the audio that it sounds like, but it was a scream howl. But the thing was, it was followed by 2 claps. It sounded like 2 rocks clacking or something like that. It's what I first thought was 2 rocks clapping. But what got me was, I took a deep breath and I was like, and I said, "A wild man." And that was my reaction to hearing this. And that wild man was a word that I don't usually use ever. It wasn't in my vocabulary that I know of. I've always referred to anything that's Bigfoot or Sasquatch as just that. So hearing this, you know, that was my first reaction, was wild man.
My aunt's mother is named Angie, and her husband was Bud Jenkins at the time, and her brother Bob McKendry were all in the same home. In the middle of this particular night in February, it had been raining, and I don't know if the moon was out or if the moon would come and go, as it often does, by way of the cloud cover coming in and going out. But Angie got up and went through the living room to the bathroom. They had one bathroom, and she happened to look out the front window, and something huge was climbing over her fence, and she just automatically, not knowing any difference and having no backup information, she just thought it was a bear, and she knew that the bear was on her garden side of this arrangement, and she didn't want that bear rooting around her garden. So she went back in the bedroom and told her husband, "Bud, there's a bear in the garden and I want him out of there. He's going to tear things up." Well, he says, "Well, where's the shotgun?" So she says, "I don't know, it's over there." Something like that. And in the meantime, Bob got up and asked, "What's going on?" She says, "There's a bear in the garden." And he says, "Well, I'll just go outside and yell at it." So he went that direction. Bud came out of the room. He says, "I got the shotgun, but where's the shells?" And she says, "I don't know, I moved them." And so they didn't have they had the shotgun, but they had no shells. In the meantime, Bud says, "Well, where's Bob?" Bob went out to chase off the bear. And in the hubbub, they just gave up on the shotgun, and they walked up to the door. The door, there was a screen door on the door and a kind of a little alcove. In that, going on there, they looked around, they didn't see Bob anywhere, and a moment later they looked out, and here's Bob crawling on the sidewalk back into the house. And he couldn't even stand up. He's just crawling, doing everything he could to get out. And they're looking at him. When they looked up behind him, literally behind him, was this animal. It was a Bigfoot. They didn't even know what to call it. It was so new to them, because it was pre-Patty, the 1967 event, and it wasn't really publicized anywhere about any of this going on. So they didn't have a name to attach to this animal. All they knew, it was big, and it was walking right behind Bob, and Bob was making motions to get back into the house as quickly as he could, considering. And when he come in the door, Bud and Angie got a hold of the screen door, and they're trying to shut it. At that point they were in a state of shock. They really didn't know what was going on. They were just trying to stop. Well, what happened was Bob came in, they tried to get the door shut, and they couldn't get it shut. It wouldn't click, and it was just a screen door anyway. The Bigfoot came up to the door. It was taller than the door by quite a little bit. And when doors are 78 inches roughly, that's a standard door. I don't know if that was a standard for that particular place, but I think it was. But anyway, it walked up to the door, put his hand on the sill, and leaned in and was looking at him. It still unnerves me, even today, to think of how big that animal was, and how close they were to it. At that point in Bigfoot history, there wasn't really a lot of anything like that going on. And the animal leaned over, looked inside the door at him, and they said it had a look on its face of just nothing but curiosity.
I have a story that happened like 25 years ago. And my son and my nephew, Pete Heiss, was living with us at the time. So we drove out here. That was before this road was paved, and it was just all logging road, and bounced all the way out here. And we went up to this hillside over here, and I can look out my window every day and see that mountain where I went and where we saw 2 Sasquatches. And so anyway, we were driving up the hill, and we were all having a good time just talking, not really seeing any wildlife. So anyway, we were just having a good time, and all of a sudden we were going around the corner up the hill. There's a big hill you go up, and then a couple curves like that. We went around, and just as I rounded one corner and ready to go, another corner, there was one standing, like, standing upright facing us. And then the other one was like in a 3-point stance, knelt down in front of the other Sasquatch. So there were 2 of them there. And, I just slammed on the brakes. I mean, we were probably in the truck from here to where Michael's at right now. I don't know how the distance. I'm never very good on telling how far that would be. Probably about 30 feet. Yeah. But yeah, like me looking at John, I that's what he was doing. He was staring eye to eye, the one standing, having eye contact with me. And I didn't know what was going on. I freaked out. And the boys, they looked at him as well, and it was like we could not believe this, because this one was just staring at me. And it didn't. It had long hair, but you could see the face. And so anyway, the first thing that came to my mind is, let's get out of here. So I put the truck in reverse, and as I was looking back, trying to get us down this big steep hill and around the corners as fast as I could, because there was nowhere to turn around. So finally, I got down there and got to the turnaround spot and took off. What shocked me is that the human form was of the face was something else. You could see their face. It's kind of like they had like our skin in a way, but the hair was all there, like they always talk about. It was really hairy, and it was like the size of a door. It's what I can say. It's like huge. It was, if I was in that big truck I was describing and I was looking eye to eye with that thing had to have been pretty tall, and I was frightened. That was the main thing. Is I was first feeling that I felt was I was fearful, and I just wanted to get out of there. My kids were saying, Pete told me that when I put it in reverse and I had to look back because I was trying to get us out of there, Pete said that one of them was running after us.
So, yeah, it was 2000, we think 2008. I can't really remember for positive the year, but it was right around there because we're trying to figure out the ages of our boys. And we decided we were going to go on a little weekend camping trip pretty close to home. And so there's this little lake up at the end of Baker Lake they call Depression Lake. It's a seep lake below the dam, the dike, the upper dam. And they plant trout in there and stuff, and it's a great place to take kids fishing because you're pretty much guaranteed to catch fish up there.
It's one of the only free camping areas around.
Yeah. And so we went up there, and there were, probably 20 other spots that were full. People it's kind of like dispersed camping. You just kind of camp anywhere. And it was pretty full. There were a lot of people up there. And went fishing and stuff and played around for the day and set up camp and had a fire and dinner and everything for the evening and, the regular camp out stuff, went to bed. And somewhere, middle of the night, probably somewhere between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm having this nightmare. Being a combat vet, I got PTSD. I have nightmares. And,
it's normal.
Normal. So it's like no big deal. I usually just have like a nightmare and I roll over, I go back to sleep, and ignore it. And so I'm trying to just sleep. Sandy starts poking at me.
I grabbed him like this.
Yeah. When I woke up, she says, "Do you hear that?" And I said, "Yeah, I thought I was having a nightmare." It was crazy. It was, screaming, howling. It was so loud. It was so loud, so intense, and so close. It was like monsters. And I can't remember for sure, but I'd swear Sandy said, it is, I think she said, it's a monster, but she said she didn't. But
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I said, I just quietly grabbed him and shook him because I wanted him to wake up and hear, and I didn't want him to hear anything but this noise. And when it was all over, I said, did you hear that? Or what was that? He said, yeah. And I said, we don't belong here. And my whole being felt that. And I grew up in the city, but we would come up to Baker Lake and to this lake and camp every summer. You know, it was a regular thing, and I always felt at home up there. And not that night. That night, every bone in my body felt we do not belong here. And I said, we got to go.
And I said, all right, honey, I'll start the motorhome because I'm the one that drives it. There was stuff piled in the seats and everything. And I said, I'll start the motorhome. You run outside and get the lawn chairs. And she goes, I'm not going out there. And I said, neither am I. And so, yeah, we just kind of hunkered down in the motorhome.
We went back
to coyotes. After
That's
all
right,
of that
the
and everything, the coyotes, there were coyotes howling everywhere. The coyotes started going, and it was like a group of coyotes over here, and then you'd hear coyotes over there, and coyotes on the other side of the lake, and
They
the
were
coyotes
upset.
were just going crazy. I mean,
They
it
kind of
was
started at the end of the howl, like this, and it didn't start off as a howl. It was a hauler. It was, and it was like you said, it just permeated all around. It was so.
No, I mean, it's like nothing I'd ever heard.
Nothing sounds like that.
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing.
I've never heard anything like that except for that night.
Our boys were pretty little, and there was nothing really to do. We're kind of trapped. Like, yeah, I'm not going to go pack anything up. I guess nobody's going out the doors.
So after everything all settled, all the noise settled and everything, everybody starts, lanterns are lighting up, cars are starting up, trucks are starting up, all the campers, everybody started everything up, and everybody started packing up and leaving. Everybody was leaving.
My neighbor, Todd Apple, who lives in the valley just below me, he gave me a call last night and said, hey, I got a friend, his name is Merritt, he drives truck and just east of Rife Lake off the 300 road. He's driving his truck and Sasquatch jumped out in front of his truck and right in front of his front grill, ran over 100 yards in front of him down the road before it took off north down to the river. And at least 9 feet tall and heavily matted blackish fur and this terrible stench.
So yesterday afternoon after work I was coming down the hill and a dark creature jumped off the hill right there and ran down the road to where we're all parked down there and then darted down the trail, and I was in a dump truck and it was about level with the windshield of the dump truck, and we were doing about 25-30 miles an hour down the hill. So that's basically it. And then I called my buddy and he reached out to his neighbor, and then that's who got you guys all out here.
Where did it come from?
Right up here somewhere. We're still trying to figure that out. It was by that tree right there.
Can you describe what it looked like?
It was about 8-9 feet tall, or 9.5 feet tall. It had big shoulders, went down, and then it got skinnier around the stomach and then wider around the hips, and then straight down. It was really shaggy, long, blackish brown hair. And the smell, I'll never forget that smell. It smelled like wet dog mixed. It smelled like a dog just went swimming in like a couple-year-old pond. It just stunk so bad.
Did you see a face?
I did not. It had its back to me the whole time. They asked too, and I couldn't see its arms moving or anything. It was hunched over and had its head sticking straight up and was just running down the road. It started out over here, and then when we got down to the bottom,
or closer to the bottom. It got in the middle of the road, and then at the very bottom by those trees, it hugged the branches and everything and then dipped down into that trail.
My name is Tyler Kennedy. I work at the North American Bigfoot Center. I had gotten off work and decided to go camping for the weekend. Got to the spot where I was going to go, got out of my car, set up my camp, realized that I was missing a couple poles to my tent, and so I had resigned myself to my car camping. But I had my fire set up, and I had my camping chair and some rocks around as like little tables and such. And it's probably 7, 8 o'clock when I get to, everything set up, and I start making food and just kind of reside and hanging out. And it was about 10:30. The clouds were blocking the moon and fully surrounded by trees with a National Forest road coming up. And I felt like something was looking at me from behind my left shoulder. So I just kind of took a look back, and it was about 20 to 25 feet away from behind me. My back left was this tree, and right sticking out behind the tree was what I thought at first was a Jim Henson's Muppet. I did not believe in Bigfoot at all. At that point in my mind, if there was Bigfoot, it was like one being, and it was lived in Washington State. Like, there would be no Sasquatch around here, let alone a little one. Never did it cross my mind. So I'm sitting there, frozen stiff. I'm looking at this thing, and it dawns on me that there's no way this is a Muppet. A Muppet would require a person, and there's one road in and one road out of this area, and it freaked me out even more because I had realized it was probably a Bigfoot, even though I didn't believe in them at that point. I just didn't know what else it could have been. So I'm sitting there frozen looking at this thing. I remember its face the most. Its lips were pursed like it was about to whistle. Its forehead, it had very like ape-like creases going along the sides, about, not too crazy, but a good replica is Murphy at the NABC to refer to. It was most like that. And then right around the bottom of the eyes, it started smoothing out, closer to like our skin, I guess you could say. Smooth like. Its hair seemed to be like a dark, like a dirty, dirty blondish color, like dark, dirty blonde. And it lasted for about 3 seconds. That's when I started coming back out of my fear zone a little bit, and I could move, and I realized that I had my gun, my 30-06 on my right side, and my 9mm on my left, and then my cell phone on my right leg. Out of that entire situation, the only thing I could think of was to grab my cell phone to use some light, just some sort of light, but just trying to illuminate to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. And the second that I even moved my hand anywhere, like a finger, any muscle, I watched it slip back behind the tree quietly and as quickly as it appeared. And I got the courage enough to grab my firearms and my cell phone, and I got into my car and locked the door. And I proceeded to fall asleep very quickly, totally anticipating to be up on high guard all night with my firearms. When I woke up the next morning, I got out of the car and went over to the spot the tree where I'd seen this thing at. Just looking for something, anything out of the normal smells. I was mainly looking for smells and is what I was looking for, but obviously I didn't find anything. I had left there. I had called my mom on the way back down because I didn't believe what I saw still. And I had proceeded to make sure, there was no trace of any like mental illness going in our blood or anything, because I literally felt like I was going crazy. I didn't know how to explain what I saw.
It was in the first week of April of 2013. Sarah and I, we were standing right over here, and it was right before sunset, so the lighting was a little bit different than it is right now. It was a little more shaded than it is. And we're over here, and Sarah's in front of me a little ways, and I'm stopping right here, and I'm looking over here. And as we were approaching here, let me back up a second. As we were approaching here, there was some chatter that we were hearing coming from here, as well as like knocks and rock clacks. And Sarah's in front of me a little ways. We know that something is back here. And I stop and I'm looking over here approximately 100 feet away. And that's when I see a Sasquatch come up and by the tree. And I'll show you exactly where he was. So I saw him come from about right here when I looked over. And I wasn't seeing, like, I couldn't see how wide his shoulders were at the time. But I saw him come up to the tree, and then he's looking around like this. And he was bent over like this. And from as far away as we were at the time, his size was just enormous. I could tell that he looked stupid trying to hide behind this tree, because it wasn't hiding anything. And if I was to hide behind this tree, I would be much more hidden than the Sasquatch. But when he was like this and coming out from this side over here, I noticed that, like, down in here, like his thighs, his glutes were very, very muscular. And when I was looking at his head, it was pretty conical shaped, and it was shaded just enough in here at the time that it was a combination of his face being dark, and I couldn't make out any features within his face at all. But he's making these really fast twitch motions, like, and then I'm not sure how long this went on for. I've said that I thought it went on for a minute. It could have been a minute, it could have been 45 seconds, it could have been 30 seconds, but I was so scared at that time that when I'm standing over there and I'm looking at him, I'm just looking at him through, like, the corner of my eye like this, because I didn't want to look challenging, like, yep, I see you. I didn't want anything to go sideways. And when I was looking at him, towards the end, he was getting, like, crouched down like this. And then the last that I looked over, he had to have been laying down on the ground.
The house that I grew up in was right across the street from a graveyard, and when I lived there, we didn't really have a whole lot. We didn't have TV or anything like that, and at the end of the day, I would quite frequently look out the window and look across to see if I could see any deer in the graveyard. The old lady who lived next to me, she had some prize roses in her front yard, and she was always telling me, oh, these deer are always eating my roses, I can't stand it. And so I had moved up from California, and I really wanted to see any animals that I could see, and so I would always look out the window hoping to see deer and anything else. And so one night I was laying on the couch, I was peeking out under the curtain on the window, and I was looking out into the graveyard, and there was a deer, and it was just doing typical deer stuff. It was eating the grass, maybe nibbling on the roses that are on people's gravestones, and all of a sudden it did this, like the standard deer kind of startled response where it gets super paralyzed, it's looking over its shoulder, it's trying to figure out what's going on, and all of a sudden it just takes off running. And it was right in front of me, about maybe 125 feet away, and it took off, and right behind it is what I thought was a bear, and it was chasing it. It was super fast. The deer ran kind of away from my house at an angle. It went behind this building that was a mortuary building at the edge of the graveyard, and I lost sight of both of them. And I thought that was it. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I thought it was National Geographic in my front yard. And then the deer and the bear came around the other side of the mortuary building, and they were coming straight at me. I was watching it the whole time. The bear looked like it was about to get the deer. It was super close. I was convinced that this bear was about to grab this deer in my front yard. And so the deer, it barely makes it away. It pops out into the street over into kind of a power substation area. And you can see its sides are just heaving, it's out of breath, but it's just sort of standing under the street light. And so I watched that for a while, because the bear, I couldn't see the bear anymore. It was, dark, and I couldn't see anything, so I was just watching the deer for a while until the lights in front of the mortuary building kind of
flickered out, and I realized, oh, it just walked in front of those lights. And so I looked and I was watching it. It was crouched low to the ground. It was moving really, really slowly, kind of parallel to me across the graveyard. It just walked really slowly. I watched it kind of the whole time in the shadows until it finally got to the highway. There was a highway, and then it goes straight up a hillside. And right when it got to, there's like a fence and a little barricade at the edge of the highway, it stood up on two legs, and it did kind of the classic, you know, PG film, patty, you know, frame, whatever, walking across the road 2 or 3 steps, and it was gone up the hillside.
There's only one road in, one road out. There's nobody that can get in there, and it's all private property. I'm about 5 to 7 miles up the road. I'm probably 10 miles from any house in any direction. We have a couple cabins about 2 miles up the hill, and I built a blind, and it was, the right hand side was up against a tree, and it looked like a 1-seat outhouse. And I built it out of just limbs and stuff that were laying on the ground with baling wire and everything. Had a door in the back. I had a 5-gallon bucket with a board on it, and I had a shooting port right here. So I was facing directly west. I was looking at Mount Adams. I put my backpack on the left side, and I put my shotgun on the right side. So as I'm sitting there, I'm just kind of waiting for it to get light out, you know, and then I started hearing talking, and I'm like looking around, you know, I'm sitting in my blind, and I'm waiting for it to get light, and I heard talking, and I'm just like, that sounds like people talking, you know, and I'm like, there's no way. This is one road in, it's private property. I'm 10 miles, I know nobody walked in here, and I'm like, what is going on here, you know? And I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, so I actually leaned up and put my head out the blind, and then I figured out it was coming from the front of me to the left. So I was just getting ready to get out of the blind and go over there. I wasn't even going to take my shotgun with me. I was just going to go over there and tell them, hey, y'all need to get out of here because this is private property. And then I happened to look over, and where it turned and went left, I seen something moving. And then as this thing came out, it wasn't tall trees like this. It was low scrub stuff. And this thing was bent over like this as it came out. And then it stood up like that, right in front of me, about 45 yards. So I'm looking at it, and it was looking north. I was looking west, and I had a breeze in my face, so I knew. I didn't figure this out till later, but I don't think that's how it smelled me, because I came up the creek and came down, and the wind was in my face. And it was about 7.5 feet tall. It was a big, big guy. And it looked black, but it looked kind of gray. So anyway, it was looking up on the hillside, never looked at me at all. Just never looked at me. I seen the right side view from here this way. And it was just looking up on the hillside. And I was like, what is this thing doing, you know? And then it did a merp chirp. And I can't even, I've tried to mimic that, but it was like, I'll try to do my best. It was like a merp chirp, merp chirp. But it was like it was different than that. Merp chirp is what it sounded like to me. And then it stood there for and this whole experience lasted for about 10 minutes at 45 yards. And then it slowly backed up, and it bent down and went back into the trees, and I could see it moving through there. And I'm just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? You know, like, and I thought, just don't panic. So anyway, I'm sitting there for about 2 minutes, and I see movement again, and it came out again, and it did the same thing. It ducked under some trees, came out about the same spot, and it did the same thing. It never moved its arms. It never did anything. It just stood there like this. Never looked at me, didn't look anywhere but straight north, and it was bird chirp, bird chirp, bird chirp. Well, I'm ruining that one because I can't even do what it did. But stood there for about 2 minutes, and then this arm, I didn't see the arm. It never moved the whole arm. It just went like this, something like that. And then I see movement coming out again, and I'm like, oh, there's two of them. And then this one came out and did the same thing. It ducked down and stood up, and it walked over. And this one was the first one, I think, was about 7.5 feet. This one walked out and was about 6.5 feet. I think it was taller than me. But it walked up to the one that was looking north, but it was facing more like northwest, and it didn't do anything. I noticed on this one that it had 2 black stripes. It was right under its armpits, almost to its back, and it had 2 black stripes right to here. But I couldn't tell, you know, it had its arms like this as far as I could tell at that point. And then I'm sitting there watching them, and then that one turned just a little bit, not completely 90 degrees to me, but it turned just enough to where I could see this is a female, because I could see her boobs. And I'm like, oh, you know, like, oh. And then it turned just a hair more, but it never did anything. It just stood there. Then I noticed her hands were like this. And then I realized between her boobs, I could see just a little bit of a head sticking out like this. I mean, and I think it was sleeping, but I think it was holding on to her like this. And his legs were around her hips, like a mother would hold a child. And I'm like, oh my God.
Those were the black stripes.
Those were the black stripes, which was its arms holding on like this, and its legs were holding on around her hips right here. And they both looked the same. They looked black, but they looked gray. So I'm sitting there like, I didn't know what to do. I'm like, oh my God, here's a male and a female, and they got a little one. So I decided right there on the spot in my mind, if they took one step at me, I was going to grab my shotgun and I was going to step out the back door, but I was going to keep the shotgun behind that door and say, hello, hello, you know, hello, I'm here. And then all of a sudden, he just kind of gave a grunt, like, and they both turned and they walked exactly west towards Mount Adams.
So in August of 2011, I was on a remote backpacking trip with 2 coworkers, and we were out looking for high mountain lakes in the Mount Hood wilderness on a fishing trip, and we had a 2-night experience with Sasquatch. And so the first night, we set up our camp at this particular lake, and we go hike around to find some other lakes that we were going to end up fishing that day. We ended up getting lost, long story short. We ended up getting lost. Finally make our way back to our camp spot, go to bed around 11 after building a huge fire and eating, and our plan was to be out there for at least 3 to 4 days. So that night we go to bed around 11. At about 1:30 in the morning, I hear what sounds like 2 rocks being clanked together, and it's coming from 50, 60 yards away and getting closer and closer to camp. And my buddy in his tent heard this rock sound as well, and he's going, Shane, do you hear that? Are you awake? And I said, yeah. And we're trying to figure out what it was. We were guessing, could it be elk? Could it be, we had no idea. The rock clanking gets close to camp, that sound, and it stops. And then I hear just something marching around above our camp. We had 3 tents set up, with 3 of us each in our separate tents, and it was kind of circling our camp and breaking sticks. At the time I couldn't tell if it was smacking things off of trees or stepping on them. Well, that goes on for like a minute, and then that rock clank sound starts up again, and it gets further and further away. And that was it that night. So next morning we wake up, we end up kind of discussing it, but we just pass it off as whatever. And so we go hiking, back out hiking to some other remote lakes, did not get lost, went out, caught our cutthroat and trout, came back to our camp, got a huge fire going again, cooked a meal, and around 11:30 we went to bed with the plans of going and visiting a couple of different lakes that we had not been to yet. Well, about that 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning time, we hear that sound again. Now my buddy Ian was asleep the first night through everything, but this night he was awake after hearing what I'm about to tell you, and it was pretty crazy because that sound was coming closer and closer to our camp, and it stopped again. And my buddy Mitch is like, "Hey Shane, you awake?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm awake. It's back." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And you could hear this thing again marching around our camp. To my left, where my buddy Ian is, or Mitch is camping, he's hearing something to his left. Well, I'm hearing something behind me, so I don't know if there's something out there or not. But it's marching around, but this time it's moving with more pace. The brakes were louder, and then it went quiet. And it was a very quiet night, crystal clear sky, but really quiet night. And then you just hear 5 of the most powerful, and to date the most powerful knocks I've ever heard, just bam, 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 5 times. And it would echo across the lake and hit this rock snag and bounce back. I mean, you could feel the reverberation in your tent from it hitting a tree so hard. And now my heart is in my head. I'm like, oh crap. Ian's awake, my buddy Mitch, we're all awake. We're whispering, we're going back and forth. And then through the canopy up above, through the canopy on this hill, we hear something coming through the trees, hitting branches on the way down, and then a loud thud next to my buddy Mitch's tent. And he's closest to this lake, and next to him is kind of a mud pile with some skunk cabbage, and you can hear this thud. And he goes, "Oh man." I'm like, "Yeah, you know what that was, right?" I'm like, "Someone just threw a rock at us." And so I'm like, I'm freaked out. I've never had an experience like this. I've been around black bear, all sorts of animals. I've never had a Sasquatch experience before. In my head, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know, could somebody be messing with us? But how could something hit a tree that hard? My buddy Ian is freaking out. Mitch and I are kind of just quiet. And I zipped my tent. And I was just, praying to God, please don't let me see anything. And I zipped my tent. I'm looking around. And after a couple of seconds, I see movement. And what I saw was, first I just saw movement, but then I just could see like a hand on the front of this tree and something swaying back and forth. And it was built, he did it a few times. I could see fingers, an arm, a shoulder, a head. And it was dark in color. I couldn't tell you the color of the hair. I'm assuming it was black. It could have been, maybe a cinnamon color. I don't know. But this thing was built like a double-sided bridge. I mean, which is massive, massive shoulders, massive, fingers, like thick fingers, and a massive hand and a massive shoulder and arm, and it swaying back and forth. And after a couple seconds, it just dropped its hand, came out from behind the tree, and that tree was a big Doug fir tree. It was much bigger than this, and the thing just looked tall. I eventually figured out it was about 7 feet tall because there was a limb up above that its head was hitting. Anyways, it drops its arm to its side, and it just walks away up this trail, game trail. And that was it. I zipped my tent back up and I just sat there waiting for something to happen. I thought, this, is it going to come back? Is there more of them? We all collectively just sat there quietly. Nothing else happened that night. As soon as daylight hit, we literally just packed up our stuff and hiked out of there. And it was, it just solidified the existence of Sasquatch for me, but it was, at that time, one of the scariest things I've ever been through, bar none.
This window was actually busted out at the time, this kitchen window here. And so we were waiting on a replacement, and I had a piece of cardboard just covering up the whole window. But it was just the bottom piece there that was busted out. So I come and I'm into the kitchen and I'm getting a glass of water. It's 10 o'clock at night, and the cardboard started to flex inward, and I could hear the tape that I had, even the adhesive, you could hear it peeling, making that that sticky sound. And so I'm just watching this, and I'm still not thinking Bigfoot. That's not on my brain right now. Like, what the hell, I'm thinking we just cooked, I'm still trying to process it all. And really, I was thinking, how fast can I get to my gun, if whatever is on the other side decides to come in the house. And around that time, my daughter, she comes running into the kitchen, and she was 7 years old then. She goes, "I know you're trying to sneak on me." And I said, "What?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "You're outside my bedroom window making noises." And I said, "No," I said, "I'm not outside your bedroom." Well, I looked back, and when she ran into the kitchen, whatever was on the other side of this window had stopped. It's gone now. Or at least it's not pressing on the window anymore. I said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, I'm in my boxers. I said, "I'm not outside. It's 10 o'clock at night." She goes, "No, you're out there." She said, "You're making like zombie sounds and sounding like an Asian person or something, like a gurgled Asian zombie." And I said, "No," I said, I'm not out there doing that to you."
I met another guy on the road, and he looked a little bedraggled and kind of poking along. And at that time in our history, picking up somebody on a hitchhiker wasn't really a big deal. I picked up this guy, and in the course of starting through the business, I asked him where he was going to, and he said Puyallup, had to go meet his sister. And he was coming from Carbonado, where we lived. He told me what his name was, but I didn't, to this day, I can't remember what it is. But I found out within a few minutes, that he was suffering from PTSD. It's pretty severe, and had some real issues with that. And he too was a Vietnam vet, and he had come home from there in the early 70s, as opposed to the middle 70s, when the war had broken up and gone away for our purposes. And we got to talking, and he opened up a little bit when he found out that I was a vet. There's kind of a connection there that you don't have with a lot of other people. What I thought was interesting, though, was he talked about a place that he lived up on the Mowich, the river. There's nobody that lives up there. That's park. And so I asked him about it, and he said, "Well, I had to find a place that I could go and be by myself." So he kind of bootlegged into that corner of the park. The Mowich River is only 7 miles long, and it comes off the Mowich Glacier, and Mowich Lake is in the area, biggest, deepest lake in the park. And but he just extended his camp's stay by quite a bit. And over a couple of years, he had found a cedar stump that was hollowed out inside. That's pretty typical of some of the old ones, the large old growth. Some of them are 12, 14, 15, 18 feet across at the butt. And just the outside shell of the tree is holding up the whole thing. So he decided he was going to make that a home for himself, and which is illegal, but he's dead now. You can chase him if you want. He's passed away. But he brought himself a crossbow in with him, and all the hardware that he needed to by way of tools and canned goods, anything of that nature, so that he could ferret out a winter, which I thought was kind of intriguing. And at the time, quite frankly, I was kind of looking at him askance. I wasn't sure that this guy was all there in that department, but what he told me and how he told me that things were lining up to do what he was doing made sense. And so I went quite a ways with the conversation, and finally, why I don't know, but I says, "Listen," I says, "you're in a pretty restricted area, and it's all prime wilderness, and there's really nothing going on down there. I mean, I've hunted just outside the edge of that park, all over the place in there, and it's primitive. It's ugly, quite frankly." And I says, "Tell me, in your travels down there, have you ever run into a Bigfoot?" When he said that, in a blink of an eye, I was talking to a different person, complete. I mean, everything changed. There was no talk about anything different other than, yes, he says, I did. And they got into it a little bit, and he had had an opportunity, either going in or coming out, to sit down on a hillside and look across over at a patch of huckleberries, which are at that time of year more toward middle August through September. He didn't ever tell me exactly when, but he looked across the way and he saw something. It looked like a bear as far as he was concerned, standing up against a stump and picking huckleberries and stuffing them, just going like crazy. And I said, you mean picking them? He says, oh yeah. He says it would take the bush and get a hold of it and eat it like that. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I said, you're sure it wasn't a bear? He says, I have seen gobs of bear. There was not a bear. And matter of fact, he was almost mad that I brought it up. I says, well, finish telling me how'd that go? What went on there? And he said it never got down on all fours. It always stood up. He says had long arms. He says it was a big animal, but he says at that distance I couldn't tell you how big or any of the details as far as those things are concerned. And he says I was watching it for a while and I was intrigued and I was trying to figure out exactly what it was. He says, at this point I know it was a Bigfoot. At that point I didn't. And he was still trying to ferret all that out. And he says then the animal looked up right across the canyon right at him, eyeball to eyeball. And he says it just stood there for a second, digesting apparently what he was looking at, and he turned and walked toward the park. He went 200 or 300 yards through the brush and the garbage that was on the side of the hill, and kept going and disappeared into the park.